There is a strange kind of pain that comes from being forgotten, not rejected, not hated, forgotten, the kind of pain that makes you question whether the years you gave someone ever meant anything at all. I learned that lesson the hard way, and the man who taught it to me was my husband, the man I trusted more than anyone, the man I spent 12 years building a life with, the man who walked away without a single ounce of regret. At least, that's what I thought, because what happened afterward changed everything, and by the time the truth finally came out, his entire world was hanging by a thread. The morning my marriage ended started like any other. The sun was shining through the kitchen window, coffee was brewing, the dog was sleeping near the back door. Everything looked normal, but sometimes disaster arrives wearing ordinary clothes. I remember standing at the sink when I heard his footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps people make when they've already made a decision. I turned around and smiled. He didn't smile back. My stomach tightened immediately. "What's wrong?" I asked. He looked at me for several seconds. Then he said 6 words that completely changed my life. "We need to talk." Everyone says those words. Movies use them, TV shows use them, but nobody tells you how terrifying they feel when they're aimed directly at you. I set my coffee cup down. "What happened?" His face remained blank. No emotion, no hesitation, nothing. "I think we should separate." For a moment, I genuinely thought I had heard him wrong. Separate? Where was this coming from? We weren't perfect. No marriage is. But we weren't falling apart. At least that's what I believed. I laughed nervously. "Stop joking." "I'm not joking." The room suddenly felt smaller. My heartbeat started pounding in my ears. "What are you talking about?" He sat down, calmly, like he was discussing the weather, like he wasn't about to destroy 12 years of history. "I haven't been happy for a long time." I stared at him, waiting for something else, an explanation, a reason, a clue, anything. Instead, he just sat there, cold, quiet, detached. It was like talking to a stranger wearing my husband's face. "How long?" I whispered. He looked away. "A while, a while." Those 2 words hit harder than anything else, because they meant he'd been pretending, smiling, laughing, sharing meals, making plans, while secretly deciding our marriage was already over. I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged, actually shrugged. "I didn't think it would change anything." I still remember how much that hurt, not because he wanted to leave, but because he'd already decided I wasn't worth fighting for. 12 years together, and he'd given up without even trying. The weeks that followed felt unreal. Friends called, family visited, people offered support, but nothing made sense. Every day I expected him to change his mind, to realize he'd made a mistake, to remember everything we'd built together. Instead, he seemed relieved, lighter, happier, like leaving me had solved all his problems. And that realization broke me more than the separation itself, because it made me feel replaceable, disposable, forgettable. Then came the divorce, fast, efficient, emotionless, exactly the way he wanted it. He didn't argue, didn't negotiate much, didn't seem sad. He just signed papers and moved on, like I was a chapter he'd already finished reading. The worst part? He never looked back. Not once. No late-night messages, no regrets, no second thoughts, nothing. It was as if I'd disappeared from his life overnight, and for months. I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I missed warning signs. Maybe I failed somehow. Those questions haunted me every single day until one conversation changed everything. Almost 8 months after the divorce, I ran into an old coworker named Melissa. We hadn't spoken in years. She hugged me, asked how I was doing, the usual small talk. Then her expression changed. It became awkward, uncomfortable, like she accidentally knew something she shouldn't know. I noticed immediately. "What?" She hesitated. "Nothing." "What?" Her eyes widened. "You seriously don't know?" A cold feeling spread through my chest. "Know what?" She looked around the coffee shop, then leaned closer. "I thought somebody would have told you." "Told me what?" She lowered her voice. "About him." The moment she said that, every nerve in my body woke up. "What about him?" Melissa looked trapped, like she regretted opening her mouth. But it was too late now. The door had already opened, and there was no closing it again. She took a deep breath, then said something that completely shattered the story I'd been telling myself. "He didn't leave because he was unhappy." I froze. "What?" Melissa swallowed hard. He was seeing someone. The world stopped. Every sound disappeared. Every movement blurred. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. What did you just say? Her expression softened. Oh my God. You need to tell me everything. And that was the moment everything changed, because the truth was finally starting to surface. But what neither of us knew yet was that the affair wasn't even the biggest secret, not even close. The real secret was still hidden, waiting, growing, and when it finally leaked, it wouldn't just destroy his reputation, it would expose an entire life built on lies. A secret so dangerous that he had spent years making sure nobody ever found out. A secret that would eventually leave him staring at the ruins of everything he thought he controlled. But first, I had to learn how deep the deception really went. And the deeper I looked, the worse it became. Because some betrayals don't end when a marriage ends. Sometimes that's only where they begin, and I was about to discover just how far one man would go to protect the truth. Melissa's words stayed with me long after I left that coffee shop. He was seeing someone. I repeated it in my head again and again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because part of me refused to accept it. For months, I had believed the divorce happened because my marriage slowly fell apart, because he was unhappy, because maybe I had missed something. But now there was another possibility, a crueler one, that he hadn't walked away from an empty marriage. He had walked away because someone else was waiting. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor with old photos scattered around me, anniversary dinners, weekend trips, Christmas mornings, smiling faces, his arm around my shoulder, my head leaning against him, and suddenly every memory felt suspicious. Was he lying in that photo? Was he texting her after that dinner? Was he planning to leave me while I was still planning our future? The questions were endless, and every answer hurt. I called Melissa the next morning. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking. I need to know who she is. Melissa went quiet. Then she said, "Are you sure?" I almost laughed. No, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to know, but not knowing was worse. Yes, she sighed. Her name is Vanessa. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then Melissa added, she worked with him on the Westbrook account. My stomach dropped. The Westbrook account. I remembered that project clearly. Late nights, weekend calls, business trips. He told me it was stressful. He told me the client was demanding. He told me he was doing it all for our future. Now I understood. Some lies are not loud. Some lies are hidden inside normal things. A late meeting, a delayed flight, a phone turned face down, a sudden password change. I had seen the signs. I just trusted the person holding them. For the next few days, I did something I never thought I would do. I looked back, not emotionally, carefully. I checked dates, receipts, old me's, sages, calendar reminders, photos, anything that could help me understand the truth. And piece by piece, the timeline began forming. The affair had not started near the end. It had not been one mistake. It had been going on for almost 2 years. 2 years. While I was cooking dinners, buying birthday gifts, planning vacations, sitting beside him at family events, he had been building another life behind my back, and suddenly his coldness during the divorce made sense. He wasn't grieving because he had already replaced me. He wasn't confused because he'd already chosen. He wasn't guilty because he had convinced himself he deserved it. That was the part that made me angry. Not just the betrayal, the confidence, the way he walked away like he was the victim, like I was the burden, like leaving me was some brave act of self-care. But the truth was simple. He was a coward, and cowards always rewrite the story so they don't have to face what they did. Then came the second clue. It arrived through an email. An old bank notification I had ignored months earlier. I was cleaning out my inbox when I saw it. A statement from a savings account we had opened together years ago. I clicked it without thinking. At first, nothing looked strange. Then I saw the withdrawals. Small at first, then larger, then repeated. Several transfers over the final year of our marriage. Money I didn't remember approving. Money that should have been part of our shared savings. Money that disappeared quietly while he was telling me we needed to cut back. I stared at the screen. My sadness began turning into something else, something sharper. Because affairs are personal, but stolen money? That was planned. I printed everything, every statement, every transfer, every date, and the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. He hadn't just left me emotionally. He had prepared his exit financially, quietly, secretly, carefully, while I was still trusting him. That was when I stopped crying. Because grief has a limit. Eventually, pain becomes focus, and focus becomes power. A week later, Vanessa posted a photo online. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. She was smiling beside him at a restaurant. His hand was on her back, same smile he used to give me. The caption said, Finally living the life we deserve. I read those words 3 times, the life we deserve. I almost couldn't breathe, because there it was, the final insult. Not only had he betrayed me, not only had he lied, not only had he taken money, he was proud of it, publicly proud, and something inside me changed. I wasn't going to scream, I wasn't going to beg, I wasn't going to embarrass myself chasing answers from a man who had already shown me exactly who he was. No, I was going to find the truth. All of it. And I was going to make sure he could never hide behind a fake story again. But I had to be careful, because men like him don't fear pain. They fear exposure, and exposure only works when the proof is strong enough that nobody can deny it. So I made a decision. I would stay quiet, I would watch, I would collect everything, and when the moment came, I would let the truth speak louder than I ever could. The first person I called was my lawyer. Not the divorce lawyer, a new one, someone sharper, someone who listened quietly while I explained the missing money, the affair timeline, and the strange transfers. When I finished, she didn't look shocked. That almost scared me more. She just said, "Do you still have access to the account records?" "Yes." "Good. Send me everything." I asked her if it mattered now that the divorce was final. She leaned back in her chair. "It depends." "On what?" "On whether he lied during financial disclosure." Those words landed like a match on dry grass. Financial disclosure. During the divorce, both of us had listed accounts, assets, debts, savings. He had sworn everything was honest. If he had hidden money, if he had moved funds, if he had lied under legal documents, then this was no longer just betrayal. It was something with consequences. Real consequences. My lawyer looked at me and said, "Don't confront him." I wasn't planning to. Good. People like this make mistakes when they think nobody is watching. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I finally understood something. He thought leaving without regret was power. He thought silence meant weakness. He thought I would stay broken, but silence can also be preparation, and mine had just begun. Over the next month, the truth kept unfolding. Slowly at first, then all at once. I learned Vanessa wasn't just his affair partner. She was connected to the company funds. She approved vendor payments. He approved project budgets. Together, they had access to money, contracts, invoices, and client accounts. That detail bothered me. At first I didn't know why. Then I remembered something from years earlier. A dinner conversation. He had come home late, frustrated, complaining about creative billing. I had asked what that meant. He laughed and said, "Nothing, just corporate nonsense." At the time, I believed him. Now those words came back like a warning. Creative billing, corporate nonsense, hidden transfers, vendor payments. Suddenly, this wasn't only about our marriage anymore. There was something bigger underneath, something he had buried under fake smiles and business trips. And I was getting close enough to see the shape of it, but not close enough to prove it. Not yet. Then one evening I received a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no name, just one sentence. "Your ex isn't who people think he is." I stared at it. My mouth went dry. Then another message came through. "Check the company retreat from April 2 years ago." My heart began pounding. Because April 2 years ago was when he told me he was at a leadership retreat. 3 days, no spouses, no extra guests, no contact except short messages at night. I had believed him, of course I had, but now someone was telling me to look closer, so I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally the reply came, "Someone who knows what he did." And that was when I realized the secret was bigger than anything I had imagined, because I wasn't the only person he had betrayed. I was just the first one brave enough to look. The message kept me awake all night. "Your ex isn't who people think he is." I must have read those words 50 times, maybe more. Every time I looked at them, they felt heavier, more dangerous, because they weren't written by someone guessing. They were written by someone who knew something specific, something important. The problem was, I had no idea who. I tried calling the number, no answer. I sent another text, nothing. Hour. SS passed. Still nothing. Whoever they were, they clearly didn't want a conversation. They wanted me to find something, and apparently it had something to do with a company retreat from 2 years earlier. A retreat my ex had attended, or at least, a retreat he claimed he attended. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started digging. I searched old emails, photos, calendar entries, social media posts, anything connected to that weekend. At first, everything matched his story. There had been a company event. There were pictures online, team building activities, leadership workshops, networking dinners, normal corporate stuff. but then I noticed something strange. His name wasn't tagged in a single photo, not one. For a man who loved attention, that felt unusual. Back when we were married, he posted everything: promotions, business dinners, conference badges, even airport selfies. Yet during this 3-day retreat, he was practically invisible. That didn't prove anything, but it bothered me, because people hiding something often leave empty spaces where evidence should be. Later that afternoon, another message arrived. Unknown number. Look at the guest list. I sat upright immediately. My pulse jumped. Whoever this person was, they were watching. They knew I was investigating. I typed back. What guest list? No response, just silence. Again, but this time I had enough information to keep searching. Eventually, after nearly 2 hours online, I found a cached event page from the retreat. Most of the details had been removed, but one document remained. A registration list. I downloaded it, opened it, started scrolling. Names, departments, job titles, dozens of employees. Then I found my ex, and directly beneath his name, Vanessa. Registered together. Same arrival time. Same departure schedule. Same hotel package. My stomach dropped. Because according to him, Vanessa wasn't even supposed to be there. Years ago, he told me she had been assigned to another project. He specifically mentioned that. I remembered because he complained about being short-staffed. Now I was staring at proof that she had been with him the entire weekend, and suddenly the retreat looked less like a business trip and more like a getaway. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. Then another realization hit me. If they were together there, then the affair may have started earlier than I thought. Much earlier. The timeline was growing, expanding, stretching backward into places I had never questioned. And every new discovery made me wonder how many lies were still hidden, because people who can lie for years rarely stop at one secret. They build layers, one lie protecting another, one deception hiding the next, and eventually those layers become impossible to separate. 3 days later, the anonymous source contacted me again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was an email. No name, no signature, only one attachment, a PDF file. My hands were shaking before I even opened it. The document contained expense reports, company expense reports, pages and pages of receipts, hotel charges, meals, transportation, entertainment. At first, I didn't understand why they mattered. Then I noticed something. Several receipts had been submitted under company projects, but the locations didn't match the projects. The dates didn't match meetings, and some expenses were obviously personal: luxury restaurants, weekend resorts, private event ticket. Thousands of dollars, paid for by someone else, paid for by the company. I stared at the screen, confused. Then a note appeared on the final page. One sentence: start comparing dates. That was all. No explanation, no threat, no demand, just a clue. So I compared dates, and that's when things became terrifying. The luxury dinners matched nights he claimed he was working late. The resort stays matched business trips. The event tickets matched weekends when he supposedly visited clients. Everything connected. Every receipt, every excuse, every lie. For years, he had hidden personal expenses inside company reports, and if I could spot it this quickly, how had nobody else noticed? Unless someone had noticed. Maybe that's why I was receiving messages. Maybe someone inside the company already knew. Maybe they were collecting evidence too. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment. The idea followed me everywhere, at work, at home, while driving, while trying to sleep. Someone knew. Someone wanted the truth exposed. But why involve me? Why not go directly to the company? Why stay anonymous? The answer came sooner than expected, because 1 week later, another email arrived. This one contained only 3 words. He isn't alone. I frowned. Then a second email followed. Look deeper. Attached was a spreadsheet, and when I opened it, everything changed. The spreadsheet listed vendor payments, hundreds of them. Most looked normal, but several companies repeated over and over again, the same vendors, the same payment patterns, the same approvals, again and again, and every single one connected back to 2 people, my ex and Vanessa. I didn't fully understand corporate accounting, but I understood coincidence, and this was not coincidence. The numbers were too clean, too repetitive, too deliberate. Something was wrong, very wrong. That evening I met with my lawyer. I brought everything: the messages, the receipts, the spreadsheet, the timeline. She reviewed the documents quietly. Her expression grew more serious with every page. Finally, she set the papers down. "What do you think?" I asked. She paused, then chose her words carefully. "I think someone is feeding you information. I figured that out." "No." She looked directly at me. "I mean someone with access." A chill ran through me. Someone inside. Someone close enough to see financial records. Someone willing to risk everything. That narrowed the possibilities. And it also made the situation much bigger. Because if company records were involved, then this wasn't simply about a cheating husband anymore. It was about professional misconduct, possibly fraud, possibly much more. For the first time since the divorce, I felt genuine fear. Not fear of him, fear of what I might uncover, because every answer seemed to create 3 new questions, and every clue pointed towards something larger, something hidden behind years of success, years of promotions, years of carefully crafted reputation. The man everyone admired, the man who walked away without regret, the man who acted like he had won. What if none of it was real? What if the entire image was fake? 2 nights later, the anonymous source sent one final message, at least for a while. The message contained a single address, nothing else, no explanation, no instructions, just an address. I searched it online. My heart nearly stopped. The location belonged to a small office building outside the city, one that wasn't listed anywhere in company records, one connected to a vendor receiving thousands of dollars in payments, a vendor approved by my ex, and Vanessa, repeatedly. For years, I stared at the screen, then at the spreadsheet, then back at the address, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't random. This wasn't personal revenge. This was evidence, real evidence, evidence that somebody desperately wanted uncovered. The question was why, and more importantly, what would happen when the company finally learned the truth? Because if the documents were accurate, then my ex wasn't protecting one secret. He was protecting an entire network of lies. And networks don't collapse quietly. They collapse all at once. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere inside that small office building was the first piece of proof capable of destroying everything he had built. His career, his reputation, his relationship, his future, everything. And before long, the leak that would change his life forever was about to begin. The address haunted me for 3 days. Every time I opened my laptop, it stared back at me. Every time I checked my phone, I thought about it. A plain office building, nothing special, nothing dramatic. Yet somehow it felt more important than every clue I had found so far. Because unlike screenshots and spreadsheets, this was real. A physical place. A place connected to money, connected to vendors, connected to my ex. And if the anonymous source was right, connected to a secret he had spent years hiding. The question was simple. Do I go, or do I leave it alone? Part of me wanted to forget everything, walk away, move on, start rebuilding my life. But another part of me couldn't. Because once you've seen cracks in the wall, you can't pretend the wall is solid anymore. You need to know what's behind it, no matter how ugly it gets. On Friday morning, I drove to the address. I told nobody, not Melissa, not my lawyer, nobody. The building sat near an industrial area outside the city, not abandoned, not busy, just forgotten. The kind of place people drive past without noticing. Gray walls, faded windows, a small parking lot. No company signs, no branding, nothing. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never know it existed. I parked across the street, my heart pounding. Then I waited for almost 2 hours. Nothing happened. Only a few cars came and went. No obvious activity, no dramatic discoveries, no mysterious meetings. I started feeling ridiculous. Maybe this was a waste of time. Maybe the anonymous source was wrong. Maybe I was chasing ghosts. Then a black SUV pulled into the lot. And everything changed. I recognized the driver immediately, Vanessa. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking her. She parked beside the building and walked inside. No hesitation, no confusion, like she'd been there many times before, because she probably had. My pulse quickened. Why was she here? The vendor wasn't listed as her workplace. The building wasn't connected to company headquarters. Yet she walked in like she owned the place. That alone told me something important. This wasn't random. 20 minutes later, another car arrived, and when the driver stepped out, I nearly dropped my phone. It was him, my ex. Same confident walk, same expensive suit, same expression. The expression that used to make people trust him instantly. He looked around briefly, then entered the building. No hesitation, no surprise, like he'd done it 100 times. Because maybe he had. I stared through the windshield, trying to process what I was seeing. If this was a legitimate vendor relationship, why meet here? Why not at headquarters? Why hide it? Why keep it off official records? Nothing about this felt normal, and the deeper I thought about it, the less it made sense. For nearly 3 hours, neither of them came out. Eventually I left, not because I wanted to, because I had no choice. Sitting in a parking lot forever wasn't going to give me answers. I needed information, real information. So the next morning, I started researching the company attached to the address. The results were strange, very strange. The business existed, technically, but barely. Almost no online presence, no real website, no active clients, no public projects, no social media activity, nothing. Yet somehow the company had received enormous payments. Year after year, the numbers didn't match reality, not even close. A company with almost no visible activity was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars, and somehow nobody was asking questions. That afternoon, I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Within 2 hours, she called me. Her voice sounded different, more serious than usual. "Where did you get this address?" "I can't tell you," she sighed. "Then let me ask a different question." "Okay. Are you absolutely sure your ex is connected to this company?" "Yes." Silence. Then another question. "Have you looked at the ownership records?" I frowned. "No." "You should." Then she hung up. Ownership records. I spent the next hour searching public databases. Eventually I found them, and when I did, I nearly stopped breathing, because the owner wasn't my ex. It wasn't Vanessa either. It was a man named Richard Hale. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then I remembered. Richard Hale. I'd heard that name before, years earlier, at a company holiday party. My ex had introduced him as an old college friend, just a friend, someone he'd known forever, someone he trusted. Nothing unusual, except now that friend happened to own a company receiving huge payments approved by my ex. A coincidence? Maybe, but I was running out of reasons to believe in coincidences. The deeper I dug into Richard Hale, the stranger things became. His company wasn't the only one. There were others, different names, different addresses, same pattern. Minimal activity, large payments, limited public information, and several of them connected back to the same group of people, the same network, the same approvals, the same signatures. Again and again, my stomach twisted, because this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't carelessness. This looked organized, carefully organized, like something built over years. For the first time, I considered stopping, not because I was afraid of being wrong, because I was afraid of being right. Every new discovery pushed the story further away from a failed marriage, further away from an affair, further away from personal betrayal. This was becoming something much larger, and larger secrets create larger enemies. People with things to lose, people who don't want questions asked, people who become dangerous when exposed. That evening, another email arrived. The anonymous source again. No greeting, no explanation, just a photograph. I opened it and instantly felt cold. The image showed my ex entering the same office building, time-stamped, dated, multiple occasions, dozens of occasions, not one visit, not two, years of visits. Years. The source had been watching, collecting evidence, tracking movements, building a case, and apparently I wasn't the only one trying to understand what was happening. Then I noticed another attachment, a handwritten note, only 6 words. "You're finally asking the right questions." I read those words several times because they revealed something important. The anonymous source didn't just want revenge, they wanted the truth, the whole truth, which meant they probably knew far more than I did. Far more. And if that was true, then the biggest secret still hadn't surfaced. Not even close. 3 days later, I got my answer, or at least part of it. It happened completely by accident. Melissa called me while I was grocery shopping. Her voice sounded nervous. "I think something's happening." "What do you mean?" "At your ex's company." My grip tightened around the phone. "What happened?" "I don't know exactly." "Melissa." She lowered her voice. "Several finance people were suddenly terminated." My heart skipped. "What?" "Nobody knows why." "How many?" 5. 5 people. Gone. Without warning. Without explanation. And suddenly, every alarm bell in my head started ringing, because companies don't remove multiple finance employees at the same time without a reason. Something was happening internally, something serious, something hidden, and maybe, just maybe, the company was starting to see what I had been seeing. The following week became chaos. Rumors spread everywhere. People whispered about audits, investigations, missing documentation, executive meetings, emergency reviews. Nobody knew the full story. But everyone could feel it. Something was wrong, very wrong. Then one evening, Melissa called again. This time she sounded frightened, not nervous, frightened. I heard a name. "What name?" She hesitated, then said it quietly. "Richard Hale." My blood ran cold. The same owner, the same friend, the same hidden company, the same address. Now his name was appearing inside company discussions, which meant the walls were beginning to crack. And once cracks appear, collapse is only a matter of time. That night, I sat alone in my living room, thinking about everything: the affair, the money, the fake vendors, the hidden office, the anonymous source, the growing investigation. Piece by piece, the picture was becoming clearer, but one question still remained. Why? Why risk everything? Why build such a complicated network? Why create so many lies? The answer came the next morning. Not from a phone call, not from an email, from a leak. A leak so damaging that by lunchtime executives were panicking, by evening employees were talking, and by midnight my ex's biggest secret had finally started reaching the public. The secret he thought nobody would ever discover, the secret hidden behind years of success, the secret powerful enough to destroy everything he had built. And when that information escaped into the world, there was no way to put it back. The countdown had begun. The leak started on a Tuesday morning. At first, nobody paid attention. One anonymous post on an industry forum, a few screenshots, a handful of financial records. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make national headlines. Most people scrolled past it without a second thought. But the people inside the company noticed immediately, because the screenshots weren't random, they were real, and they contained information that should never have been public. By noon, managers were calling emergency meetings. By afternoon, executives were canceling appointments. And by evening, panic was spreading through the entire organization. Someone had opened a door that was never supposed to open, and what was behind it was starting to spill out. I first heard about it from Melissa. Her call came just after lunch. She didn't even say hello. They leaked documents. I sat up instantly. What documents? Financial records. My pulse accelerated. How bad? Silence. Then she answered. Worse than anyone expected. I stared out the window, trying to stay calm, trying not to jump to conclusions, but deep down, I already knew. The truth was finally surfacing, and truths buried for years rarely emerge gently. Within hours, screenshots started appearing everywhere. Internal invoices, vendor payments, approval chains, expense reports, entire conversations. The same names kept appearing over and over. Richard Hale, Vanessa, my ex, again and again and again. At first, company leadership tried to control the damage. They issued statements, called meetings, promised reviews, but people weren't stupid. Employees started comparing information. Former workers started speaking. Questions spread faster than answers, and every answer created new problems. That evening, I received another email from the anonymous source. No greeting, no signature, just a single sentence. The first wall has fallen. Attached was a document, one I had never seen before, a detailed internal report, incomplete, partially redacted, but enough to reveal something important. The company had already been investigating for months, maybe longer. That realization stunned me. All this time, I thought the anonymous source was trying to start an investigation. Instead, it looked like they were accelerating one that already existed. The company wasn't discovering the problem. They already knew there was a problem. They just hadn't realized how large it was. I spent hours reading every page, every note, every summary, every warning. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Questionable contracts, unusual approvals, repeated payments, missing documentation. The same issues appearing year after year, always connected to the same small group of people, the same names, the same network, the same secret office, and right in the center of it all, my ex. The next morning brought even more chaos. Several major clients began asking questions. Questions companies hate. Questions that involve money. Questions that require honest answers. Questions executives can't avoid. Investors wanted explanations. Partners wanted reassurance. Employees wanted truth. Nobody was getting it, at least not yet, because leadership was still trying to understand the full scope of what had happened, and the deeper they looked, the worse it became. Then something happened that nobody expected. Vanessa disappeared. Not physically, not completely, but she stopped showing up. Her social media accounts vanished. Her public profiles disappeared. Phone calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back. It was as if she had stepped into the shadows overnight. People noticed immediately, and her disappearance only fueled more rumors, because innocent people usually defend themselves. People with nothing to hide usually speak. Vanessa chose silence, and silence has a way of sounding like guilt. 3 days later, I saw my ex for the first time in months, not in person, on television. A local business reporter was covering the growing controversy. The camera caught him, leaving company headquarters. For the first time, he didn't look confident. He looked tired, worried, cornered. His expression lasted only a few seconds. But it was enough, because I recognized something I had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. The kind people feel when control starts slipping away. The kind people feel when secrets stop obeying them. I wish I could say seeing him suffer made me happy. It didn't. Not exactly. What I felt was stranger than that. For months, I had carried the weight of betrayal alone, the confusion, the humiliation, the self-doubt. Meanwhile, he had moved forward. Reward like none of it mattered. Now the balance was changing. Now he was the one losing sleep. Now he was the one answering difficult questions. Now he was the one discovering that actions have consequences. And strangely enough, that brought peace, not revenge, peace. Because justice and revenge are not always the same thing. Revenge wants suffering, justice wants truth, and the truth was finally arriving. The following week, another leak appeared. This one was far more damaging. Emails, hundreds of them, private communications, approval requests, conversations that should never have existed. As journalists and analysts examined the material, a clear picture began emerging. The network wasn't accidental, it wasn't sloppy, it wasn't misunderstood. It had been built deliberately, carefully, over years, one step at a time, and every new revelation pointed toward planning, not mistakes. Planning, that distinction changed everything, because mistakes can be forgiven, poor judgment can be explained. But planning reveals intent, and intent changes how people view you forever, especially in business, especially when trust is involved. One evening, my lawyer called. I could hear excitement in her voice, something unusual for her. Have you seen the latest documents? Some of them. Then you need to see the rest. My stomach tightened. What happened? She took a breath. They found another layer. Another layer. Those words felt dangerous, because every layer uncovered so far had exposed something worse than the one before it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but I asked anyway. What kind of layer? The pause that followed lasted several seconds. Then she answered. The hidden vendors were only part of it. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? I mean, someone was moving money beyond those companies. The room suddenly felt smaller. How much money? Another pause. Then, more than anyone expected. For several moments I couldn't speak. Because if she was right, then everything discovered so far represented only the surface. The visible part. The part easiest to find. Which meant the real secret. The biggest secret. Was still buried deeper, still hidden, still waiting. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts kept circling the same question. How far did this go? Every time I thought I had reached the bottom, another hidden room appeared, another secret, another lie, another deception, and somehow my ex remained connected to all of it. The husband who claimed he was simply unhappy, the husband who walked away without regret, the husband who acted like he was starting a better life, now looked more like a man running from consequences that were finally catching up. 2 days later, the anonymous source returned. A new message, short, direct, terrifying. The real evidence is coming. That was all. No explanation, no details, nothing. But somehow those 5 words felt heavier than every message before, because they implied something obvious. Everything leaked so far wasn't the main event. It was preparation, a warning, a preview, the opening chapter. And if that was true, then whatever came next was going to be devastating. The next morning, P. roved it. By sunrise, rumors were spreading through the company faster than ever. By lunchtime, several executives had hired outside legal advisors. By evening, emergency board meetings were underway. The atmosphere had changed completely. People were no longer asking whether something was wrong. They were asking how bad it really was. And nobody liked the answers they were finding, especially my ex. Because while everyone else was searching for information, he was desperately trying to stop it, trying to contain it, trying to prevent one specific document from becoming public. One document, one file, one piece of evidence, the very thing the anonymous source had been building toward from the beginning. And when that file finally surfaced, it wouldn't just damage his career, it would expose the biggest lie he had ever told. A lie so massive that even Vanessa didn't know the entire truth. And once that truth leaked, everything would change. By the time the rumors reached their peak, one thing had become clear. There was a file, not just any file, the file. The one people whispered about in hallways, the one executives suddenly refused to discuss, the one lawyers seemed obsessed with finding. Nobody knew exactly what was inside it, but everyone seemed to understand the same thing. If that document became public, everything would change. And judging by how desperately my ex was trying to stop it, he understood that better than anyone. The strange thing about secrets is that they often reveal themselves before they're exposed. You can see the panic, the rushed decisions, the sudden silence, the nervous conversations that stop when someone enters the room. The signs start appearing long before the truth arrives, and those signs were everywhere. Employees were being interviewed, departments were being audited, records were being reviewed, outside investigators were involved now. The company had stopped pretending everything was under control. Because it wasn't. Not anymore. Melissa called almost every day. Each conversation sounded more unbelievable than the last. People were leaving. Managers were resigning. Executives were avoiding public appearances. Entire teams were being questioned. And through all of it, one name kept resurfacing. My ex. Not because he was the only person involved, because he appeared connected to almost everything investigators were reviewing. Every road seemed to lead back to him, and the closer those roads got, the more desperate he became. Then something happened that surprised everyone. Vanessa returned, not publicly, not completely, but she resurfaced. A few internal meetings, a few appearances, a few conversations, and according to Melissa, she looked terrified, not angry, not confident, terrified. That detail stayed with me because fear tells a story, and Vanessa's fear suggested something important. Maybe she hadn't known everything, maybe she thought she understood the situation. Maybe she believed she was protecting herself, until she realized how much bigger the truth actually was. 3 nights later, I received another email from the anonymous source. The subject line contained only 2 words. He's trapped. I opened it immediately. Inside was a short message. The board has seen the file. My heart started racing. The board. Not investigators. Not employee. As the board, the people with the most authority, the people capable of ending careers overnight, the people responsible for protecting the company. If they had seen the file, then things were worse than anyone imagined. Much worse. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to imagine what kind of evidence could frighten powerful executives, because money alone rarely creates panic. Companies deal with financial problems all the time, but trust is different. Trust is everything, and once trust disappears, entire organizations can collapse, which meant whatever was inside that file probably wasn't just about money. It was about deception, the kind that destroys confidence, the kind that changes how people see you forever. The answer arrived 48 hours later, not through a leak, not through a journalist, not through Melissa, through pure accident. A business publication released an article summarizing developments inside the investigation. Most of it repeated information already known. Questionable contracts, vendor payments, internal reviews, nothing new. Then I reached the final paragraph, and everything stopped. The article mentioned an internal document allegedly linking several vendor companies to individuals secretly benefiting from company funds. I read the sentence 3 times, then again, secretly benefiting. Those 2 words changed everything, because they answered the question that had haunted me for months. Why? Why build fake companies? Why create hidden vendors? Why move money around? The answer was simple. Someone was profiting. Someone had created a system designed to benefit themselves. And suddenly, every clue made sense. The affair, the expensive lifestyle, the sudden confidence, the luxury trips, the hidden transfers, the unexplained money, everything connected, like pieces of a puzzle finally locking together. My ex hadn't left because he was unhappy. He left because he thought he had already won. He believed he had secured a future nobody could take away. A future built on money, a future built on secrets, a future built on lies. And now that future was falling apart. The next morning brought the biggest shock yet. Melissa called before sunrise. Her voice was shaking. I heard something. What happened? One of the investigators resigned. I frowned. Why? No idea. Then why does it matter? Her answer chilled me. Because he resigned after reading the file. Silence filled the line. Neither of us spoke for several seconds, because we were both thinking the same thing. How bad must the information be if even investigators were walking away? What exactly was hidden inside that document? The answer finally arrived later that week. Not officially, not publicly, but enough details leaked to reveal the truth. And when I learned what was inside, even I was stunned, because the file wasn't a single document. It was a collection, years of records, years of approvals, years of financial activity, years of evidence, all connected, all organized, all documented. And sitting at the center of it was something nobody expected. Ownership records, private agreements, internal communications, evidence suggesting that several vendor companies were never truly independent. They were connected, controlled, managed through layers of people designed to hide who actually benefited. A network. A carefully constructed network, one designed to stay invisible, one designed to look legitimate, one designed to survive scrutiny. Until now, for a long moment I couldn't move, because suddenly I understood the scale. This wasn't a single mistake. It wasn't one bad decision. It wasn't one affair or one lie. It was an entire alternative reality, a system, a machine, built piece by piece over years. And my ex had been standing in the middle of it the whole time. The public reaction was immediate. People who once defended him started distancing themselves. Former colleagues stopped speaking. Business partners disappeared. Friends suddenly became unavailable. The support system he once relied on began collapsing. Not because people enjoy abandoning others, because nobody wants to be standing near an explosion, and everyone could see the explosion coming. Then came something even worse. Questions, public questions, questions from journalists, questions from clients, questions from investors, questions that demanded answers. And answers were becoming increasingly difficult to provide, because every explanation created contradictions. Every statement created new problems. Every defense revealed another weakness. The story was unraveling faster than anyone could control it. One evening, I saw a recent photo of him online. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. He looked older. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence was gone, the certainty was gone, the smile was gone. In its place was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too many secrets for too long, the kind that comes from realizing the truth is finally catching up. And for the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel angry. I felt something else, relief, because I finally understood something important. None of this happened because of me. I wasn't abandoned because I wasn't enough. I wasn't replaced because I failed. I wasn't left behind because I deserved it. I was simply standing too close to a man whose entire life was built on deception. And eventually, deception consumes everything around it, including the people creating it. But the worst part was still ahead, because despite everything already exposed, the biggest revelation hadn't leaked yet. The one piece of evidence investigators were guarding most carefully. The one discovery capable of turning a corporate scandal into something much larger. The revelation hidden inside the final section of the file. A revelation connected to a name nobody expected. A revelation so damaging that even company leadership wasn't prepared for it. And when that final truth reached the public, the man who walked away without regret would discover that losing a marriage was nothing compared to losing everything else. The countdown to complete collapse had begun. There comes a moment in every lie when the liar realizes the story is no longer theirs to control. Not when the first rumor appears. Not when the first question is asked. Not even when evidence begins leaking. The real moment comes when the truth develops its own momentum, when it no longer needs help, when it starts moving on its own. That was exactly where my ex found himself, because by now, the story had become bigger than any one person. Bigger than the company, bigger than the investigation, even bigger than the scandal itself. People everywhere wanted answers, and the final answers were getting closer. The atmosphere inside the company had completely changed. Employees who once defended leadership were suddenly protecting themselves. Managers were documenting everything. Former executives were hiring attorneys. Departments were conducting internal reviews. Every conversation felt cautious. Every decision felt temporary. Everyone understood the same thing. The next leak could be the one that changes everything, and nobody wanted to be standing in the wrong place when it happened. Melissa called me one evening while I was making dinner. Her voice sounded exhausted, like someone who had spent weeks living inside chaos. I heard they're reviewing old partnerships now. I paused. What kind of partnerships? The really old ones. How old? She lowered her voice. Before Vanessa. That caught my attention immediately. Because until now, Vanessa had seemed central to everything. The affair, the payments, the hidden vendors, the office, the approvals. But if investigators were looking further back, then maybe Vanessa wasn't the beginning. Maybe she was just one chapter, and if she wasn't the beginning, who was? That question followed me for days. Then another email arrived from the anonymous source. No greeting, no explanation, just a single sentence. The first secret wasn't Vanessa. I stared at those words, reading them over and over, because deep down I already knew what they meant. The affair had never been the real story. It was only the distraction, the visible part, the part people noticed. The deeper secret existed long before her, and somebody was finally preparing to expose it. 3 days later, the answer arrived, not through a leak, through a board meeting, a confidential board meeting that somehow became anything but confidential. Details started spreading almost immediately, first among employees, then reporters, then the public, and at the center of every discussion was a single name: Richard Hale. Again, the friend, the business owner, the quiet figure standing in the background, the man everyone assumed was just a small part of the story. Turns out, he wasn't. Not even close. The investigation had uncovered something nobody expected. Richard Hale wasn't simply a vendor owner. He wasn't merely a college friend. He wasn't an outside business partner. He was as connected to nearly every questionable arrangement investigators had reviewed, nearly all of them, which meant one thing: he wasn't part of the system, he helped create it. And if that was true, and then investigators needed to understand how far their relationship actually went. What they found shocked everyone. My ex and Richard hadn't just stayed in touch after college. They had remained deeply connected for years. Business deals, private agreements, investment arrangements, property interests, financial partnerships. The relationship was far more extensive than anyone realized. Far more. And suddenly the hidden vendor network started making sense, because the same names kept appearing, the same patterns, the same connections, the same approvals, over and over again, like fingerprints left across an entire operation. Public reaction was immediate. People weren't just questioning individual transactions anymore. They were questioning everything: every promotion, every contract, every major decision, every success, every achievement. The story changed overnight. The question was no longer, did something improper happen? The question became, how much of his success was real? And that question was far more dangerous, because money can be repaid, contracts can be canceled, investigations can end. But once people stop believing your success was earned, you lose something much harder to recover: your credibility. Then came the revelation nobody saw coming. The final section of the file leaked, the section everyone had been protecting, the section executives feared most. And when details emerged, even seasoned reporters were stunned, because investigators had allegedly discovered communications showing long-term planning, not reaction, not mistakes. Planning, years of planning, strategies, discussions, coordination, conversations that painted an entirely different picture, a picture of people actively creating opportunities for themselves while presenting those opportunities as independent business decisions. That distinction changed everything. I remember reading the first report. My hands were shaking, not because I was surprised anymore. Surprise had disappeared weeks ago. What I felt was something else: validation. Because for months I had questioned myself, questioned my judgment, questioned my memories, questioned my worth. Meanwhile, he walked around acting like he had simply moved on to a better life. Now the truth was visible, not just to me, to everyone. And the truth looked nothing like the story he had told. A few days later, Vanessa finally spoke. Not publicly, not in an interview, but through a statement released by her attorney. The statement was carefully written, carefully controlled, but one sentence stood out, one sentence everyone noticed. I was not aware of the full extent of certain activities. The full extent. Those 3 words exploded across social media, because they implied something enormous. If Vanessa didn't know everything, then who did? The answer seemed obvious: my ex. For the first time since the investigation began, public opinion shifted dramatically. Before, many people believed several individuals shared equal responsibility. Now that assumption started fading. More and more attention focused on one person: the man at the center, the man who approved, the man who benefited, the man who always seemed one step ahead, until he wasn't. The pressure became relentless. Every day brought new questions, new reports, new discoveries, new problems, and with each passing week, his world became smaller. Friends disappeared. Professional contacts stopped responding, invitations stopped arriving, phone calls stopped being returned. The network he spent years building was collapsing piece by piece. Not because people hated him, because they no longer trusted him, and trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. One evening, Melissa called again. This time she sounded shocked. "I can't believe it. What happened?" "They suspended him." For several seconds I couldn't speak, because despite everything that had happened, part of me still expected him to survive. People like him often do. They find loopholes, technicalities, escape routes. But suspension meant something different. It meant even the people who once protected him were stepping back. The walls were closing in, fast. That night, I sat alone thinking about the past, about our marriage, about all the moments I blamed myself, The nights I stayed awake, wondering what I had done wrong. The months spent believing I wasn't enough. The endless cycle of doubt. And suddenly, I saw everything clearly. The problem had never been me. The problem was that I trusted someone who had stopped being honest long before I realized it. Someone who became so comfortable with deception that eventually he couldn't separate truth from performance. Someone who spent years managing appearances while reality quietly rotted underneath. And eventually reality won. Reality always wins. But the story still wasn't over. Not yet. Because suspension wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Investigators were still working. Journalists were still digging. Former employees were still talking. And somewhere inside thousands of pages of records sat one final discovery. A discovery investigators had not released. A discovery connected to personal finances. A discovery that would explain why he left so confidently. Why he believed he would never face consequences. Why he walked away without regret. And when that final secret emerged, the collapse would become complete, not just professionally, personally, financially, publicly. Everything he spent years building would begin disappearing at once, and this time, nobody would be able to save him. People often imagine that a downfall happens in one dramatic moment, one headline, one arrest, one shocking revelation. But real collapses rarely work that way. Most happen slowly, a crack here, a loss there, a relationship broken, a reputation damaged. Then suddenly, one morning, the entire structure gives way, and everyone wonders how it happened so fast. The truth is, it didn't happen fast. It was falling apart long before anyone noticed. That was exactly what happened to my ex. The suspension changed everything. Before that, many people still believed he might recover. Maybe he would explain things. Maybe the investigation would clear him. Maybe the story wasn't as bad as it looked. After the suspension, that optimism disappeared. Fast. Because organizations don't suspend senior people unless they have serious concerns. Everyone knew that. Employees knew it. Clients knew it. Investors knew it. And most importantly, he knew it. For the first time since the divorce, he was no longer controlling the narrative. The narrative was controlling him. A week later, another article appeared. This one focused on personal financial records. At first glance, it seemed less dramatic than previous reports. No explosive accusations, no shocking headlines, just numbers, accounts, transactions, transfers, boring information, the kind most people ignore. But hidden inside those numbers was the answer investigators had been chasing. The answer to the biggest question of all. Why had he seemed so confident when he left? Why had he walked away like a man who already knew he would win? The answer was money. A lot of money, more than anyone realized. The investigation revealed evidence suggesting that substantial funds had been quietly accumulated over several years through the same network of relationships already under scrutiny. Nobody knew the exact amount. Reports varied wildly, but every estimate was significant, very significant. And suddenly, the entire divorce made sense. The timing, the confidence, the lack of hesitation, the coldness, the complete absence of regret. He hadn't been taking a risk when he left. In his mind, he had already secured the future, a future funded by resources he believed nobody would ever connect back to him. That realization hit me harder than I expected, not because of the money itself, because of what it revealed. For years, while I was planning a life together, he was apparently planning a life after me, a completely different future, one that didn't include me, one he believed was protected, safe, untouchable. That was the betrayal that hurt most. Not the affair, not the lies, the planning, the fact that he had been preparing his escape while pretending everything was normal. The public reaction was brutal. People who once admired him now viewed every past success through a different lens. Achievements that once looked impressive suddenly looked suspicious. Stories that once sounded inspiring suddenly sounded calculated. The trust he spent years building disappeared almost overnight, and without trust, very little remains. Then came the financial consequences, one after another, relentless. Partnerships ended, contracts disappeared, consulting opportunities vanished, investments were frozen, projects were canceled, potential employers stopped calling, potential clients stopped responding. Every door that once opened easily suddenly slammed shut, not because people enjoy watching others fail, because business runs on confidence, and confidence had evaporated. Melissa kept me updated. By now, even she sounded exhausted by the endless developments. Every week brought another setback, another departure, another review, another investigation, another consequence. It seemed endless. And perhaps for him, it felt that way too, because there was no clear ending anymore, only uncertainty. Then something happened that surprised me. He called, for the first time since the divorce. My phone rang late one evening. I looked at the screen. His name. After everything, after all the months, after all the silence, there it was, his name. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Then I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt strange, heavy, uncomfortable. Finally he spoke. How are you? Of all the things he could have said, that was what he chose. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Months of betrayal, months of lies, months of chaos, and now he wanted small talk. I'm fine, I said. Another silence. Then he sighed, a tired sigh, different from the man I remembered, different from the confident person who walked away. This sounded like someone carrying weight, a lot of weight. I know you've probably heard things. Probably. The understatement almost made me smile. He continued. A lot of things being said aren't true. There it was, the defense, the explanation, the attempt to reclaim control. I listened quietly, not arguing, not helping, just listening, because something felt different. For the first time, he wasn't speaking from a position of confidence. He was speaking from desperation. For nearly 20 minutes he talked. Investigations, rumors, media coverage, people turning against him, misunderstandings, bad decisions, unfair assumptions. The list went on, yet throughout the entire conversation, one thing stood out. He never accepted responsibility, not once. Every problem had another explanation. Every consequence had another cause. Every situation was someone else's fault. And suddenly I understood something. The investigation wasn't what destroyed him. His inability to be honest destroyed him. The investigation merely exposed it. Eventually, he stopped talking, and for the first time, I asked a question, only one. Did you ever feel guilty? Silence, long silence, the longest silence of the entire conversation. Then he answered, not immediately, not confidently, quietly, almost reluctantly. Sometimes, not always, not enough to stop, not enough to tell the truth, not enough to change course, just sometimes. That answer told me everything. When the call ended, I sat alone for a long time, thinking, reflecting, remembering, and strangely enough, I wasn't angry, not anymore, because anger requires attachment, and whatever attachment remained had finally disappeared. The person I loved no longer existed. Maybe he never had. Maybe I only loved the version he showed me, the version carefully designed for public view, the version that hid everything underneath. Over the following months, the consequences continued. More reports surfaced, more details emerged, more questions were answered, and each answer reinforced the same conclusion. The collapse wasn't caused by one event. It was caused by years of choices, years of shortcuts, years of secrecy, years of believing consequences only happened to other people until they didn't. Meanwhile, my own life slowly improved. Not dramatically, not overnight, just gradually. The way real healing happens, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one step forward at a time. I stopped checking headlines every morning, stopped following every update, stopped waiting for the next revelation, because eventually I realized something important. His story no longer needed to be my story. I was free to move forward, and for the first time in years, I actually did. But one final revelation was still coming, one final truth hidden inside the investigation, a truth not about money, not about vendors, not about business, a personal truth. A truth connected directly to our marriage, the truth about who first exposed everything, the identity of the anonymous source, the person who sent the messages, the documents, the warnings, the evidence, the person who started me on this path. And when I finally learned who they were, I was left completely speechless, because the last person I expected to be behind it all was the person who had been standing closest to him the entire time. For months, one question had followed me everywhere. Who was sending the messages? Who knew so much? Who had access to documents, records, emails, and internal information? And perhaps most importantly, why had they chosen me? Not a journalist, not law enforcement, not the company, me, the woman he left behind, the woman he thought would never matter again. At first I assumed the source was an employee, then I suspected an investigator, then maybe a former business partner. Each theory made sense for a while, then fell apart, because whoever this person was, they didn't just know the facts, they knew him, personally, deeply, intimately. The messages made that obvious. Sometimes they hinted at details that never appeared in reports. Sometimes they referenced conversations that couldn't be found in documents. Sometimes they seemed to understand how he thought, how he reacted, how he made decisions. This wasn't someone watching from a distance. This was someone who had been standing very close. 3 weeks after his phone call, another email arrived. The first one in nearly a month. No attachment, no evidence, no instructions, just a single sentence. You deserve to know the truth. That was different, very different. For months, every message had focused on evidence, facts, documents, clues. This one felt personal, almost emotional, and for the first time, I wondered if the anonymous source was struggling too, maybe carrying secrets, maybe carrying guilt, maybe carrying regrets. The next day, a second email arrived. This one contained a meeting location, a small cafe on the edge of town. Saturday, 2 o'clock. No name, no explanation, nothing else, just a place and a time. I stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes, my heart pounding. And because deep down, I knew what this meant. After months of hiding, the source was finally ready to step into the light. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before. My mind kept racing through possibilities. Who would be sitting there? An employee? A friend? An investigator? A stranger? Every possibility felt equally likely and equally impossible. By the time I reached the cafe, my hands were shaking. I parked, sat in my car, took several deep breaths, then walked inside. The place was quiet, only a handful of customers, soft music, coffee cups, conversations. Normal, completely normal, which somehow made it feel even more surreal. I looked around carefully. No obvious clues, no familiar faces. Then someone stood up from a corner table, and I froze. Completely froze, because I knew her, not well, but enough to recognize her immediately, enough to understand why I never considered her, enough to realize why she knew so much. It was Emily, my ex's former executive assistant. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I simply stared, trying to process what I was seeing, because suddenly everything made sense. The access, the knowledge, the timing, the documents, the emails. She had been close enough to see everything, close enough to hear conversations, close enough to notice patterns, close enough to understand what was happening long before anyone else. She looked nervous, terrified actually, the kind of nervous that comes from carrying a burden for far too long. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry." 3 simple words, but they carried years of weight. Years. I sat down slowly, still trying to understand. "You sent the messages?" She nodded. "Yes." "Why?" Her eyes filled with emotion immediately, and suddenly I realized this wasn't easy for her, not even a little. She wasn't enjoying this, she wasn't celebrating, she looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in months, maybe longer. For several moments she couldn't speak, then finally she managed it. "Because I helped him." The words landed like a stone. I stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She looked down, ashamed. "I didn't know everything." Her voice shook, but I knew enough. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life, because Emily wasn't a villain, she wasn't a mastermind, she wasn't secretly controlling events, she was something far more human. She was someone who saw warning signs and ignored them, someone who trusted the wrong person, someone who convinced herself that uncomfortable questions had harmless answers, someone who looked away because looking closer felt dangerous. In other words, she had done exactly what I did. Years earlier, Emily started noticing strange requests, odd paperwork, unusual approvals, documents that didn't quite make sense. At first, she assumed there were explanations. There always are. At least that's what people tell themselves. Then she noticed more, and more, and more. Enough to become concerned, but not enough to act. Not yet. Then came Vanessa, and suddenly everything accelerated. The secret meetings, the hidden schedules, the private arrangements, the unusual travel, the unexplained expenses. The pattern became harder to ignore, and still Emily remained silent. Not because she approved, because she was afraid. Afraid of losing her job, afraid of being wrong, afraid of what would happen if she challenged someone powerful. So she kept quiet. For years, I listened carefully, and strangely enough, I understood, not because I agreed, because fear makes people do things they later regret. Fear convinces good people to stay silent. Fear tells us someone else will speak up, someone else will act, someone else will fix it, until eventually nobody does. "What changed?" I asked. Her answer came immediately. "You." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded, slowly, sadly. "After the divorce." I frowned. "I don't understand." Emily took a deep breath, then said something I never expected. "The way he talked about you." The cafe suddenly felt silent, even though people were still talking around us. I couldn't hear any of it, only her, only those words. "The way he talked about you." Emily looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He wasn't sorry. A knot formed in my stomach. He wasn't conflicted. She paused. He wasn't sad. Every word hurt, not because I hadn't suspected it, because hearing confirmation made it real. Then she said something worse, something that stayed with me forever. He acted like you were an obstacle. I stared at her, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to process what I had just heard, because an obstacle isn't a person, an obstacle is a problem, something standing in the way, something to remove, something to move past, and suddenly the divorce made more sense than ever before. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I hated myself for staying silent. Her voice cracked. I watched him destroy people. She swallowed hard. And I did nothing. The guilt was obvious, overwhelming, years of guilt, years of regret, years of wishing she had acted sooner. Eventually, she reached into her bag and removed a folder, a thick folder, the final folder, the one she had never sent electronically, the one she refused to email, the one she wanted delivered personally. I stared at it, then at her. What is this? For the first time that afternoon, Emily looked genuinely frightened, not nervous, not emotional, frightened. Everything. My heart started racing. What do you mean? She pushed the folder across the table. Inside were documents, letters, notes, communications, records, and one item highlighted in yellow. One item Emily clearly wanted me to see first. One item connected directly to us, to my marriage. One item proving that the biggest lie wasn't financial, it was personal, deeply personal. And when I finally read it, I understood why Emily waited until now. Because the truth inside that folder wasn't just capable of destroying his reputation, it was capable of destroying the story he told everyone about why our marriage ended. The story he had spent years protecting. And once I opened that folder, there would be no turning back. For several seconds, I just stared at the folder. The cafe around me faded into the background. The conversations, the music, the clinking coffee cups, all of it disappeared. Because suddenly, after months of searching, I was standing at the edge of the final truth. The truth Emily had risked everything to protect. The truth my ex had spent years trying to hide. The truth connected directly to me, to my marriage, to the day he walked away without regret. My hands were trembling as I opened the folder. The first pages were familiar. Emails, internal notes, travel records, meeting schedules, documents supporting things I already knew. The affair, the hidden trips, the secret meetings. Nothing shocking, not anymore. Then I reached the highlighted section, and everything changed. At first, I didn't understand what I was reading. The documents appeared ordinary, a series of emails, private conversations, scheduling notes, nothing dramatic. Then I noticed the dates. My stomach tightened, because the dates weren't from the final year of my marriage. They weren't from the affair period. They weren't even from the years leading to the divorce. Some were nearly 5 years old. 5 years. I looked up at Emily. She nodded slowly, as if she already knew exactly what realization was forming in my mind. The affair hadn't started 2 years before the divorce. It hadn't started 1 year before. According to the records in front of me, the relationship had begun almost 5 years earlier. 5 years. Nearly half of our marriage. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because every timeline I built, every theory, every assumption, had been wrong. Not completely wrong, just incomplete. The betrayal wasn't deeper than I thought. It was older, much older. I kept reading, and the deeper I went, the worse it became. Messages discussing future plans, private conversations, travel arrangements, references to shared goals, years before he ever mentioned separation, years before he claimed he was unhappy, years before he said our marriage was failing, and suddenly everything became clear. The marriage didn't fail first. The affair came first. The lies came first. The deception came first. Then the marriage collapsed afterward, not because it was broken, because it was being abandoned. The distinction mattered a lot, because for years I blamed myself. I assumed we drifted apart. I assumed we changed. I assumed I missed warning signs. Now I understood something painful. The relationship never had a fair chance. Not during those final years, because while I was trying to protect it, someone else was secretly replacing it. Emily watched quietly as I continued reading. Then I found the document that truly shattered everything. A private communication. Short, simple, only a few lines, but devastating. The message had been sent years before the divorce. Years. And in it, my ex wrote something that made my stomach drop. He referred to our marriage as temporary. temporary. I read the word 3 times, then again and again, because it didn't feel real. How could 12 years be temporary? How could promises be temporary? How could a life together be temporary? Yet there it was, in black and white, years before he left, years before he admitted anything. He had already started viewing our marriage as something that would eventually end. That discovery hurt more than any affair, more than any financial secret, more than any lie, because affairs involve temptation. Money involves greed. But this involved intention, planning, a future that excluded me, a future he was preparing long before I knew it existed. Emily looked devastated watching me read. I wanted to tell you sooner. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I should have. I closed the folder slowly. No. She looked confused. No? I shook my head. If I learned this back then, it would have destroyed me. And it was true. Back then, I was still trying to save the marriage, still blaming myself, still hoping. Back then, this information would have shattered me. Now it was different. Now it explained things. Now it brought clarity. Painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless. For the next hour, Emily filled in the gaps, the things documents couldn't explain, the things only witnesses could see. According to her, my ex spent years creating different versions of himself. One version for executives, one version for friends, one version for Vanessa, one version for me, and eventually he became so good at managing appearances that people rarely questioned him, rarely challenged him, rarely doubted him, because he always knew what to say. Always knew how to look trustworthy, always knew how to control the room, until the evidence became stronger than the image. Then Emily told me something that surprised me, something I never expected. You're not the only one. I frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then answered carefully. There were others. The room suddenly felt colder. Others, not affairs, victims, people affected, careers damaged, employees blamed, partners misled, colleagues pushed aside. The more she described it, the clearer the pattern became. My divorce wasn't an isolated event. It was part of something bigger, a larger habit, a larger character flaw, a larger pattern of putting personal gain ahead of everyone else. That realization changed everything, because for months, I viewed the story as my story, my heartbreak, my betrayal, my recovery. Now I understood it differently. This wasn't about me. Not entirely. I was simply one of many people caught in the path of someone who believed consequences didn't apply to him, someone who always assumed he could manage the outcome, control the narrative, stay ahead of the truth, until he couldn't. Then Emily gave me one final piece of information, the last piece, the one she had saved for the end, the one that made complete sense of everything. The investigation is almost over. I looked up. What happens then? Her answer came immediately. The findings become official. Official, that word mattered because rumors can be denied, leaks can be questioned, articles can be challenged, but official findings, those become history, those become records, those become facts. For the first time since this entire journey began, I realized we were close to the end, not close to another revelation, not close to another leak, close to the end, the real end, the moment where everything stops being speculation and becomes truth. A few days later, I received another phone call, not from Melissa, not from Emily, from my ex, again. This time his voice sounded different, completely different, not defensive, not confident, not frustrated, defeated. The difference was impossible to miss. And before the conversation ended, he said something I never thought I would hear, something that would have meant everything months earlier, something I once desperately wanted, an apology, a real apology, or at least the beginning of one, but by then, something inside me had changed, and the words didn't have the power they once did, because some apologies arrive too late, not because they aren't sincere, because the damage is already done, and the next conversation we had would prove exactly that, because after years of lies, years of secrets, years of pretending, the final confrontation was finally coming, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of it. There was a time when I imagined this moment constantly, usually late at night, usually when I couldn't sleep. I would replay conversations in my head, imagine what I would say, imagine how he would react, imagine finally getting answers. Back then, I wanted closure more than anything. I wanted explanations, reasons, confessions, something, anything. I believed closure was something another person could give you. I was wrong, because by the time the confrontation finally happened, I had already discovered the truth. And truth changes everything. His message arrived 2 days after our last phone call. Short, simple, direct. Can we meet? I stared at the screen for a long time. Months earlier, I would have said yes immediately. Months earlier, I would have desperately wanted the conversation. Now, I wasn't sure. Not because I was afraid, because I no longer needed anything from him. That realization surprised me. For so long, he occupied space inside my mind, space inside my emotions, space inside my life. Now that space felt empty, not painful, just empty, and strangely peaceful. I almost ignored the message. Almost. But something stopped it. Me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe finality. Maybe the simple desire to close the last remaining chapter. Whatever the reason, I eventually agreed. One meeting, one conversation, one ending. Then I would move on forever. We met at a small restaurant outside the city. Neutral territory. Quiet. Private. The kind of place where nobody pays attention. I arrived first, sat near a window, ordered coffee, waited, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt absolutely calm. No anger, no anxiety, no hope. Just calm. Then he walked in, and for a moment I barely recognized him, not because he looked different, because he felt different. The confidence was gone, the certainty was gone, the effortless charm that once impressed everyone around him had vanished. He looked tired, older, smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying years of consequences all at once. He sat down across from me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar, but very different from the silence that existed during our marriage. This wasn't tension. This was reality. Two people finally sitting without illusions between them. Eventually, he broke the silence. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. Nothing more, because I didn't know what else to say, and honestly, I didn't feel responsible for making the conversation easier. For several moments, he stared at his coffee. Then he sighed. The same exhausted sigh I'd heard during our last call, only heavier, much heavier. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know where to start." For years, he always seemed to know exactly what to say. Now he looked lost, and somehow that felt fitting. "Start with the truth," I said. The words came out calmly, not aggressively, not emotionally, just honestly. The truth, for once, nothing else. He looked down, then nodded slowly, and for the first time in our entire relationship, he stopped trying to manage the story. What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no shocking confessions, no screaming, no emotional breakdowns, just honesty, painful honesty, the kind that arrives years too late. He admitted the affair started much earlier than I knew. He admitted he had been planning a different future. He admitted he lied repeatedly. He admitted he convinced himself that leaving was justified, that he deserved happiness, that he deserved another chance, that he deserved a better life. The strange thing was, I already knew most of it. The investigation had revealed enough. Emily had revealed enough. The documents had revealed enough. What mattered wasn't the information. It was hearing him finally stop pretending. Then he said something unexpected, something I hadn't prepared for. I spent years convincing myself I was the good guy. I looked at him carefully, because for the first time, that sentence sounded genuine, not strategic, not calculated, genuine. He continued, "I always had a reason." His voice was quiet. "I always had an excuse." Nah, he laughed bitterly. "A justification." The word hung in the air. Justification. The thing people use when they don't want to face themselves. The thing people hide behind when the truth feels uncomfortable. I told myself the marriage was already over. He stared at the table. Then I used that lie to justify everything else. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because there wasn't much left to say. The truth was already sitting between us. Clear, simple, unavoidable. Then he asked the question I never expected, the question that changed the entire conversation. "Do you hate me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and surprisingly, the answer came immediately. No. His eyes widened slightly, like he didn't believe me. Maybe he expected anger. Maybe he expected resentment. Maybe he expected revenge. Instead, I told him the truth. I did. I smiled sadly. For a while. The honesty seemed to catch him off guard because it was honest, not polite, not performative, honest. Then I continued. "But hate takes energy." I leaned back slightly, and eventually I got tired. The silence that followed felt different, lighter, healthier, like something heavy had finally left the room. For years I thought healing meant forgiveness. Now I understood something different. Healing isn't always forgiveness. Sometimes healing is indifference, not cruel indifference, peaceful indifference, the moment another person's choices stop controlling your emotions, the moment their actions stop defining your future, the moment you finally become free. He nodded slowly, as if he understood. Maybe he did, maybe for the first time. Then he apologized. Really apologized. Not the careful version, not the public version, not the strategic version. A real apology. For the lies, for the betrayal, for the years of deception, for the way he handled the divorce, for the pain he caused, for all of it. Months earlier, hearing those words would have broken me. Months earlier, I would have cried. Months earlier, I would have desperately needed them. Now, I simply listened, because apologies don't erase consequences. They don't rewrite history. They don't restore lost years. What they do is acknowledge reality, and sometimes that's enough. When he finished, I nodded, nothing more. Not because I rejected the apology, because there wasn't anything left to negotiate. The past had already happened. The future was already moving forward, and neither of us could change that. Eventually, the conversation shifted. The investigation, the company, the fallout, the consequences. He didn't discuss details, didn't defend himself, didn't blame anyone else. For the first time, he seemed willing to accept that his decisions created his situation. And honestly, that was probably the most surprising thing he said all day. After nearly 2 hours, the conversation ended nature. Ally. No dramatic final speech, no emotional goodbye, no cinematic moment. Just two people standing up from a table, one chapter ending, another already finished. As we walked toward the exit, he stopped, turned toward me, and asked one final question. Do you think people can change? The question lingered in the air. For several seconds, I considered it carefully. Then I answered honestly, yes. He looked hopeful until I continued, but only after they stopped lying to themselves. The expression on his face told me he understood exactly what I meant. Then we walked away, in opposite directions, for the last time. And strangely enough, I didn't look back, because there was nothing left behind worth carrying anymore. The confrontation was over, the apology was spoken, the truth was known, the chapter was finished. All that remained now was the final outcome, the official findings, the final consequences, and the lesson hidden inside everything that happened, a lesson neither of us fully understood yet, but one that would become impossible to ignore when the investigation finally reached its conclusion. And when that conclusion arrived, the story wouldn't end with revenge. It would end with something far more powerful. The truth. A month after our final meeting, the investigation officially ended. No more leaks, no more rumors, no more anonymous messages, no more speculation. For the first time in nearly a year, everything became clear. The company released its findings, industry publications reported their conclusions, legal teams finalized their reviews, and the story that had once existed in whispers was now written in plain language for everyone to see. The details were complicated. The documents were extensive, the financial records stretched across years, but the conclusion itself was surprisingly simple. Trust had been broken, repeatedly, deliberately, and the consequences were unavoidable. When I read the final report, I expected to feel something dramatic: victory, relief, vindication, maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt calm, because the truth no longer belonged to me. It belonged to reality. And reality doesn't need defending. Reality simply exists. For months, I had imagined what justice would look like. I pictured headlines, consequences, public embarrassment, people finally seeing what I saw. But real justice looked different, much quieter, much less dramatic. Real justice was waking up without anger, without confusion, without self-doubt. Real justice was finally understanding that none of what happened was my fault. The company moved forward. New leadership arrived. Policies changed. Reviews were implemented. The people responsible faced the outcomes of their decisions. And eventually, as all organizations do, the company began rebuilding, slowly, carefully, one step at a time. As for Vanessa, she disappeared from public view, not forever, but long enough. The relationship that once looked so perfect from social media eventually faded away. No dramatic ending, no scandalous reveal, just reality. Because relationships built on secrets often struggle when the secrets disappear. When the excitement fades, when the fantasy ends, reality has a way of demanding honesty, and honesty is difficult when a relationship begins with deception. Emily left the company shortly after the investigation ended. We stayed in touch, not every day, not every week, but enough to understand each other, enough to recognize that both of us carried regrets, different regrets, but regrets nonetheless. The difference was that Emily chose to do something about hers. Eventually. Late, but eventually, and sometimes that's all people can do. Melissa remained exactly who she had always been. A friend, a steady voice during chaos, the person who accidentally started me down the path toward the truth. Without her, I might never have learned any of it. Without her awkward conversation in that coffee shop, I might still be blaming myself, still wondering what I did wrong, still carrying guilt that never belonged to me. And then there was him, the man who walked away without regret, the man who believed he controlled the ending, the man who spent years building a life based on appearances. What happened to him? Honestly, nothing dramatic, no cinematic downfall, no single moment where everything exploded. Life isn't usually that neat. Instead, he experienced something much harder. He had to live with the truth. Every day, every conversation, every opportunity lost, every relationship changed, every reminder of what his choices created. Because consequences don't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes they arrive as reflection, sometimes they arrive as realization, and sometimes realization is the heaviest consequence of all. Months later, I received one final message from him. Short, simple, respectful, no requests, no explanations, no excuses, just a message. It read, "I hope you're happy." That was all. 4 words. Nothing more. I stared at the message for a long time, then I smiled. Not because of him, because of my answer. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what it was. Yes, I was happy, not because he lost, not because I won, because I survived, because I healed, because I stopped measuring my worth through someone else's choices, because I finally understood who I was without needing anyone else's approval. That realization changed everything. For years, I believed the end of my marriage was the end of my story. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a different one, a better one, a more honest one, a story where I stopped chasing people who didn't value me, a story where I stopped blaming myself for other people's decisions, a story where I learned that betrayal says more about the betrayer than the betrayed. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything ended, I found an old photo, one of our wedding pictures. Years ago, seeing it would have broken my heart. This time, I simply looked at it, studied it, remembered it, then put it away. Not because the memories didn't matter, because they no longer controlled me. The photo represented a chapter, not my entire life. Just a chapter, and chapters are supposed to end. That's what allows new ones to begin. People often ask what the biggest lesson was. The answer surprises them. It wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about affairs. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. The biggest lesson was this. The truth is patient, that's all. The truth doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It doesn't beg to be believed. It waits. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes for years, sometimes much longer, but eventually, the truth arrives, always. For a long time, my ex believed he had escaped consequences. For a long time, he believed he controlled the story. For a long time, he believed appearances mattered more than reality. And maybe, for a while, they did. But appearances are temporary. Reality isn't. Eventually, reality catches up. Eventually, every choice leaves a trail. Eventually, every lie becomes heavy enough to carry. Eventually, every secret reaches daylight. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, always eventually. And that brings me to the final truth. The truth I wish someone had told me the day my marriage ended. The day I sat alone wondering why I wasn't enough. The day I blamed myself for someone else's choices. The day I thought my life was falling apart. Here it is. When someone betrays you, don't let their actions become your identity. Don't carry their guilt. Don't carry their lies. Don't carry their shame. Let them carry it. It belongs to them, not you, because the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you. The greatest revenge is refusing to let them destroy you. It's rebuilding, healing, growing, moving forward, living well, finding peace, and becoming the person they never thought you could become. He walked away without regret. At least that's what I believed. But in the end, regret found him, the same way truth found him, quietly, patiently, unavoidably. And while he spent years running from reality, I learned how to live with it. That difference changed both of our lives. Forever.